And we are continuing with the 12th chapter of Dragons in the Waters by Madeleine L'Engle. This chapter is called The Return of the Phair. The next day had the timeless quality of a dream for Simon, while he took him through the village, through the caring places. Simon stood in the cool interior of the caring place for the dying. There were 2 long rows of low beds, 12 on each side. Only 2 of these were empty. By most of the beds, the Quistana was seated, holding the hand of a dying person. The air was fragrant with flowers. Here was no horror, only an ineffable sense of peace. "I'm not sure," Simon whispered. "Not sure of what?" "That I'm strong enough. I'm afraid of death." "That is all right," Uvaldi said. "So am I. I have been out in the world and I have learned fear and lost faith. So I have returned to Dragon Lake to lose fear and reclaim faith. That will happen to you too." Several of the Indians started to sing. "A soul is going," Uvaldi said. "It is being sung into the land of the blessed. But many of those who are brought here to die do not die. They get well, and they take some of our peace and some of our caring with them. And my ancestor started all this with you, Mara. Everybody here is so good." But Uvaldi shook his head. "No, we are as other people, some good, some bad. Many leave Dragon Lake and choose the material goods of the world." "Uvaldi, what am I to do?" "You will do what is right. I am trying to hide nothing from you. It is a constant struggle for us to keep to the Quistano ways. If you become one of us, it will be your struggle too, will it not?" "You would not wish us to change?" Simon shook his head. "My ancestor started these caring places. No, I would not want you to change, Uvaldi. I would be the one to have in charge. Not as much as you think." "Gutierrez, you said he turned his back." "Or I would be the one to have to change. Not as much as you think." Gutierrez, you said he turned his back on the ways of his people?" "Not only Gutierrez, all of that particular tribe, and they learned to like to kill, not to eat, not for life, but to destroy. What's going to happen to him?" While they moved his shoulders sinuously. "He is an evil man. He will be made to pay." Simon shuddered. "And Jan? And Jan? What about Jan?" "Jan did not kill. The Englishman knows that." "But who did?" Uvaldi shrugged. "I do not know his name, but it is someone Jan thought of as a friend. He will be sad. Come, I still have much to show you." The passengers stood on the promenade deck of the Orion, all leaning on the port rail and looking down at the dock. Geraldo had summoned them together, saying that the captain, El Señor Commandant Tortaro, and Mynheer Vermeer wished to speak to them. Everyone watched as the dark car drove up. "Look!" Mrs. Smith cried. "It's Jan!" Jan left the car, crossed the dock, and ran up the gangplank to the Orion. He did not look at the passengers. Charles moved to his father, and Dr. O'Keefe took his son's hand in his own. "Daddy, Charles," Polly said, "has Jan been cleared?" "Wait, no doubt we'll find out what's going on in a minute." Dr. Eisenstein looked relieved. "I couldn't bring myself to believe that Jan would murder." "Someone did," Dr. Wordsworth said, "and I would like to know who it was." They all turned as they heard the screen door into the ship close with a light slam. Vermeer came out onto the deck, affable as usual. Dr. Wordsworth took a step toward him, then stopped. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "perhaps you all saw someone getting out of a car just now, and now you want to know what is going on, and why you have been asked to come together here. It is my sad duty to inform you that Mynheer Boone went to the captain last night and confessed to the murder of Mr. Phair." The facts were very much as Canon Dallas had guessed. The straw that broke the back of Boone's resistance was a hint from Hurtado that Simon had been murdered. It was this last horror which finally caused Lyolf Boone to go to Van Leyden. "Oh, how terrible for Jan!" Polly cried. Dr. O'Keefe said, "But at least he's completely cleared." "But Mynheer Bloom, he was Jan's friend," Vermeer said. Gutierrez threatened to kill Simon and Canon Dallas unless Boone kept his mouth shut, Dr. Wordsworth said. From what you have been telling us, it would seem that if Boone had not killed Propice, then Propice might well have succeeded in finding a way to dispose of Simon. It is quite possible. Then, although it wasn't exactly a murder of self-defense, it was in order to stop Simon from being murdered. Vermeer beamed. That will be taken into consideration, I'm sure, Mr. Smith asked. But the smuggling? He will have to pay for that. He was into an art racket, as Hurtado called it. But Propice and Gutierrez were trying to get him involved in chemicals. So for that too, Dr. Wordsworth said, he has no way out except to remove Propice. He refused to deal with drugs or chemicals. Yes, Propice would undoubtedly have destroyed him one way or another had he remained alive. And that too will be taken into consideration? Dr. Eisenstein asked. I would assume so. But there would still have been Gutierrez, Mr. Smith said. There would. Mynheer Bloom had, as my friend Hurtado said, painted himself into a corner, Dr. Wordsworth asked. Did Gutierrez know that Boone had killed Phair? He guessed. He accused him, hoping in this way to avoid what Hurtado calls the rap. I hate Gutierrez, Polly cried. He's a beast. He didn't care whether he killed Simon and Uncle Father or not. He was just using them to hurt Mynheer Boone. Gutierrez and Propice made Mynheer Boone be something he never should have been. Mr. Smith said heavily, that first breach of honesty, which can lead to so much disaster. Dr. Wordsworth reached out and took his hand with unexpected solidarity. We've been lucky, you and I, Mr. Smith. We managed to break away from bondage. Mr. Theo said, Thank God Simon and Tom are all right. That's what we have to think about. But what about the captain, Vermeer? As long as Boone's smuggling was done ashore and not on the ship, the captain cannot be implicated. The Bolivar portrait was Propice's first weapon, or first wedge. But we have the portrait. It was not only to implicate Jan that Boone sent it to the Quistanos. It was the only place he could think of where it would not be taken by the art smuggling ring he was trying to get free of. So we have the portrait, and I think the captain will have no problem. That is one of Mynheer Boone's greatest concerns, Dr. Wordsworth asked. What's going to be done with the portrait? Miss Phair and the Quistanos wish it to be given to the Bolivar Museum, which would not have been Mr. Phair's intention. Which had not been Mr. Phair's intention. It had not. Polly whispered to Charles, I sort of wished Simon could keep the portrait. Aunt Leonis is right about things knowing where they belong, Charles said, in an exhausted and withdrawn manner. Vermeer clapped his hands together. Now, my dear friends, I have good news and an invitation. You are all free to go into town or whatever you would like until 5 o'clock this afternoon, when you are all requested to return to the Orion. Dr. Wordsworth's conditioned reflex with outrage at any curtailment of liberty. Why? She demanded. Vermeer beamed at her. Cars will be waiting to take the entire company out to the Quistano settlement at Dragon Lake, where a feast is being prepared. This will be an excitement for my fellow anthropologist, will it not, Dr. Eisenstein? After the exclamations had died down, he said, My dear doctors, I should count it my extreme privilege to accompany you today and be your guide, if you will permit. Dr. Wordsworth bowed graciously. Vermeer turned his sunshine on the old Greek. Mr. Theo, a car will come to take you to the cathedral for as long as you desire to play the organ. Will you be ready in half an hour? In 5 minutes, Mr. Theo said. Polly asked anxiously, Simon and Uncle Father are really all right? Really and truly all right? Vermeer's smile seemed to reach completely around his head. Really and truly, he said. And then he looked at her father. May I have a word with you, sir? Of course, in my cabin. Please, Vermeer turned to Dr. Wordsworth. I will call for you ladies in a quarter of an hour. Despite the heat, he shut the door to Dr. O'Keefe's cabin. If there is anything my government can do to assist in your investigations, Doctor, we will be glad to do so. Thank you. You know that there have been cases of mercury poisoning near Dragon Lake? Yes. What can you do? Dr. O'Keefe ran his hand worriedly through his hair. I am a scientist and not a politician, but I will use every big gun I have, and Talus has friends with influence who will bring their weight to bear. Even Dr. Eisenstein may be useful. People all over the world are rebelling against the results of greed. Perhaps we are ready for a test case, and the problems of Dragon Lake involve at least half a dozen nations. The Cristianos do not want publicity. We will keep it to the minimum, but they will do what has to be done to save the lake and the people of the barrio. Few individual magistrates in Europe or America will worry about what is happening to a small tribe of Indians, most of whom they have never even heard about. We will do everything we can to stop the deterioration of the lake, Dr. O'Keefe said heavily. I am grateful for your help. My Cristano friends understand what is going on. They have an example of the problem in one of their caring places right now. Mercury poisoning? Yes, a child from the barrio. Yes, they will help. I am a realistic man, Doctor. I know how difficult it is going to be. But I also believe that if just in one place we can win the battle over greed and callousness, that one victory may swing the tide over the entire world. We'll try, Dr. O'Keefe said. We will certainly try. The scene being enacted in the captain's quarters was not exactly as it had been in Charles's dream, but it was close enough. Lyalf Boone was in his summer whites. His face was turned to Yan, a face nearly destroyed with anguish and weeping. Yan, too, wept. Hurtado wore his most expressionless mask. Van Leyden had moved beyond tears. But the Orion was still his. He was still master of the ship, despite his pain over what Lyalf Boone had been forced to do. His relief washed over him like a clean salt wave from the sea. Throughout the entire ship there was both sorrow and relief. It was not a happy ending to the story, but at least it was an ending. When Van Leyden told the crew that he alone would remain on the ship, and that the rest of them were free to go to the festivities at Dragon Lake, the atmosphere lifted. As Van Leyden returned to the bridge, he heard the sweet tone of a flute playing in a haunting minor melody. The evening sun poured its benediction over the Cristano village. The water was golden, and the green sward, too, was touched with gold. A long ray of sunlight spotted the ancient Umara at the foot of the great carving. She gave her blessing to the festivities of the evening, but she herself would remain in prayers of gratitude for the return of the Phair. The canoes were pulled up onto the beach, and the villagers were waiting for the boats, bearing the passengers and sailors from the Orion. Canon Talus had graduated from his litter to a chair and a cane. Miss Leonis sat beside him. They had little need of conversation. They had moved into the companionship of mutual understanding. She knew with gratitude that Talus would stay at Dragon Lake until after her death. She wished that she, unlike Kumara, could spend the evening in solitude and prayer. But there is an eternity awaiting me for that, she thought. As though she had spoken aloud, Talus rested his hand lightly on her shoulder. A shout arose as the first boat was sighted, and then what appeared to be a small fleet appeared in the sun-flecked water. Polly was in the first boat, and she rushed ashore and flung her arms ecstatically around Canon Talus, around Simon, around Aunt Leonis, and without thinking, around Umar Zanai, as though he were a dearly beloved grandparent. "Oh, thank you, thank you. We were afraid we were never going to see Simon or Uncle Father again." The old chieftain's eyes lit with pleasure. "You are their friends. We welcome you." He looked about him until he saw Charles, who had gone to Canon Talus and was standing silently by him. "You are the true dreamer? Sometimes my dreams are special. We are grateful to you. I haven't done anything. You have dreamed true." Then he spoke to the assembled company. "We have invited you to be with us tonight because you are friends of the Phair, and he has asked to be present. And he has asked that you be present at our celebration of his return. His what? Polly's voice rose incredulously. The Phair has come back to us to make his life with us as he promised us that he would. But Simon is not Quentin Phair. Phair. He bears his blood. He is part of the memory. Simon, Polly cried. No, you're not staying here, not for good. Canon Tallis looked down at Charles. The boy was pale. The priest took his hand. It was cold. Charles, are you all right? I don't think I want to grow up. But you already have, haven't you? Simon, Polly cried. Aunt Leonis, explain to them. Explain what? Miss Leonis asked. That Simon must return with you to Pharaoh. The old woman shook her head. I will not be returning to Pharaoh. Simon's going to be a doctor, Polly cried. He can come live with us. We'd love to have him, wouldn't we, Daddy? Simon held up his hand. I have thought about this, Polly. I must stay. Why? Because it is what I must do. I ran away from Uncle Father when we were in the jungle, and the wildcat was about to attack us. Simon, Canon Tallis said, you're making too much of that. No, it has made me understand a lot of things about human beings, about Quentin, about myself. He smiled at Polly, then at Canon Tallis and Charles. The Quentin Phair I made into a god was much less real than she is, he indicated the great carved figure. I am learning to love him now as a real person. And that's a good thing, I think. There's also the matter of the revenge of Cousin Forsyth wanting to kill me. Now that he is dead, perhaps the idea of revenge will die too, but it might not as long as there are people like Gutierrez left in the world. If I stay, then the Phair has returned, and the revenge will be finished, and, he pointed to the carrying places, Quentin Phair started these. I have his work to continue. I'm going to be a doctor, and I have a great deal to learn. When the time comes, I'll go to Caracas to medical school, or maybe back to the United States, but I have plenty to learn right here. A new language, for one thing. Umar's and I raised his arms. Rejoice with us. Come, we have prepared a celebration. He drew the groups together with great embracing gestures, then led the way toward the center of the greensward, where a long, colorful cloth had been spread across the grass. It was laden with bowls of fruit, platters of salads, pitchers of assorted drinks. Dr. Eisenstein quivered with pleasure and excitement. This is more than I dared to hope for in my wildest dreams, Dr. Wordsworth said. It took a murder, so my Fernando has for once done a good deed. Mrs. Smith said, I'd like to forget him, but I'm not sure it's possible. Mr. Theo looked at the beaming Vermeer, bearing down on the group, and turned to Dr. Eisenstein. Will you do me the pleasure of sitting with me at this feast, Ruth? She glanced at Dr. Wordsworth and Vermeer and took Mr. Theo's arm. Thank you. Did you enjoy your time at the cathedral? I have washed myself clean with music. That is a superb organ. Tomorrow evening, before we sail, the captain and Mynheer Vermeer have arranged for me to play for the passengers, for those of you who enjoy music. What a privilege, Dr. Eisenstein said. I don't know much about music. My loss, and then you'll be sailing tomorrow night, Theo. He nodded. I'll miss everybody, he sounded wistful, but perhaps we'll be able to see the O'Keefes. You know, I'm not the least sorry for Gutierrez, but I feel for Boone. We all do, but it's a sorry lesson for us that one can seldom dabble only in the shallow waters of crime. There's always someone to pull us in deep. Dr. Eisenstein looked at her travel companion, laughing with Dr. Vermeer. It takes a lot of courage to get out. Perhaps Moon will be able to start a new life when he has served his term. It's Simon who's starting the new life. Is this really serious? Oh, yes, Simon is a serious boy. Dr. Eisenstein looked about. I think I envy him, she said. Polly sat in the cool grass between Geraldo and Jan. It's good that you can be with your people tonight, Jan, she said. Jan's face had a prison pallor that made it seem as though he had been jailed for more than just over 24 hours. I do not think I could be anywhere else. I need to be healed. Geraldo nodded solemnly, then took Polly's hand in his. It is good that you are staying in Port of Dragons, Poliquinta. You will be able to see Simon. Oh, Jan, Geraldo, I am so confused about Simon. Do you think he's making a terrible mistake? Geraldo kissed her hand. It is not a decision the world would understand, but it is like Simon. Polly looked gratefully at Geraldo. Charles says Simon doesn't belong in our century. The strain was ebbing slowly from Jan's face. It has always seemed to me that the Quisanos do not live in time at all. When I am here, I forget clocks and bells and all the things which occupy me when I am being Dutch. Polly looked across the greensward where Miss Leonis was sitting. What about Aunt Leonis? Jan said. She will rest her bones in Dragon Lake. You mean she's dying? She's an old woman, Poliquinta, and her work is done. Geraldo raised Polly's fingers to his lips and kissed him gently. It will be easier for me to let you go when we sail tomorrow night, because I know that Simon will need you, and Charles and your father. It will not be easy for Simon. Jan said, but he will become a healer, and the world is in need of healers. But the world won't know about him if he stays in Dragon Lake. Jan's face relaxed into his old smile. You think that matters, Miss Polly? I am Parquistano, and I know the things that truly matter, and so do you. Simon sat between Umar's and I and Waldy. On the old chieftain's other side was Aunt Leonis, with Mr. Theo by her. She looked as frail as old glass, and yet her expression was full of peace. She looked at him and smiled calmly and reassuringly. Not everybody was seated, but Umar's and I picked up a piece of fruit as a signal that the feast was to begin. Then he rose and spoke. Power behind the stars, making life from death, joy from sorrow, day from night, who heals the heart and frees the lake of dragons, and all ill, come feast with us, that we may share your feast, which with all we touch. Then he bowed his head silently. When he looked up, Miss Leonis spoke. Thou didst divide the sea through thy power. Thou breakest the heads of the dragons in the waters. Thou broughtest out fountains and waters out of the hard rocks. The day is thine, and the night is thine. Thou hast prepared the light and the sun. O let not the simple go away ashamed, but let the poor and needy give praise unto thy name. She did not bow her head, but looked briefly up at the sky, then out over the lake, and closed her eyes. Lady Signora Phair, Umar's and I said. We are as one. All around them conversation and laughter rose like butterflies in the evening air. Above the lake, the sky was flushed with color. The shadow of the mountain moved slowly over the greensward, cooling the air. Simon looked about him at the assembled company. The intensity of the past days had broken the conventions of time, and he felt that all the passengers of the Orion were old and treasured friends, and he was filled with love for them. He looked at Canon Tallis, sitting at the feast with Charles between the priest and Hurtado. He freed me to love Quentin as he really was, Simon thought gratefully. So I must love him as he really is too, and not make up another idol. I'm older now, he thought, and perhaps it is because I have come into the right time and place for me, where Cousin Forsyth would have destroyed. I must learn to continue what Quentin began. Tallis looked at the untouched plate of food in front of Charles. You're not eating. I'm not hungry, Charles said. Hurtado said, My plate is already empty. You need food, Charles. I'll try. By the by, Charles, anytime you want a job in the Venezuelan Secret Service, just let me know. Charles forced a smile. It's not my line of work, Senor Hurtado. Dreams are not an advantage to a policeman, and I get too involved. I'm feeling very sad. Not as sad as Jan or the captain they trusted Boone. I know Jan is with Polly and Geraldo. They'll help. You must help too, Tallis said. I know, I'll try. For that, then, you will need food. Hurtado piled his own plate high. Tom, I understand that the O'Keefes have 5 more children at home. Surely they don't need Charles. Don't you think you could arrange to have Charles given to me? Now Charles's smile was real. I'll always be your friend, Signor Hurtado. Simon ate and drank. His responsibility to Quentin had become real at last. Time redeemed had broken the limitations of time. Ubaldi lifted a pitcher and poured clear liquid into Simon's glass, into Umar Zanai's, and raised his own glass. To the return of the Phair. Simon raised his glass and drank deeply. Then he looked around until he saw Polly with Geraldo and Yan, Ken and Tallis with Charles and Hurtado. They were all looking at him, so was Aunt Leonis. In the jungle behind them, a bird broke into an ecstatic trill. Water rippled gently against the shore, against the pilings of the dwellings reaching out into the lake. The breeze lifted, the sky shadowed by the mountains. A star pulsed into brightness. Simon raised his glass to the assembled company. It is good to be home, he said. And that is the end of Dragons in the Waters. The next book about Polly O'Keefe is An Acceptable Time. And there is also a book about the Rainier family that Madeleine L'Engle wrote, which is called The Other Side of the Sun. I have both of those ready to read as soon as somebody listens to this and says which one they want to hear first. I will move one or the other up the to be read list, and I will see you in the next book.